The greatest deception on the spiritual path isn't that you'll be abandoned by others. It's that you'll abandon yourself the moment you meet someone who promises to complete your journey for you. This isn't about becoming a hermit or rejecting guidance entirely. It's about recognizing something far more profound, that every false mentor you encounter is actually preparing you to become your own guide, and every disappointment in seeking external salvation is secretly initiating you into the most ancient mystery of all, the discovery that the treasure you seek has always been buried within your own soul. You've felt it, haven't you? That moment when you realize the teacher, the guru, the mentor, the system that promised transformation was offering you their journey instead of awakening yours. You followed their steps, spoke their language, adopted their practices, yet something essential remained untouched, unchanged, unreached. What you didn't understand then was that this wasn't failure. It was the mythic pattern Campbell spent his lifetime illuminating. You were experiencing what every hero must face, the recognition that no one can cross your threshold for you. In the great stories that have shaped human consciousness for millennia, Campbell revealed that the hero's journey begins not with finding the right teacher, but with discovering the inadequacy of all external teachers. The Buddha left his palace and his instructors. Jesus disappeared into the wilderness. The young hero of every fairy tale must eventually face the dragon alone. This pattern repeats because it reflects a fundamental truth about consciousness itself. Awakening cannot be borrowed, inherited, or purchased. It must be earned through the solitary passage that only you can make. But here's what our modern spiritual marketplace doesn't want you to understand. The proliferation of false mentors isn't a bug in the system. It's a feature. Each disappointing teacher, each oversimplified technique, each promised shortcut that leads nowhere, is actually serving the deeper mythic function of driving you inward, toward the place where real transformation has always waited. Campbell called this the belly of the whale, that place of seeming abandonment where the hero discovers that the very isolation they feared is actually the womb of their rebirth. When you stop seeking salvation in the words of others, when you cease trying to metabolize someone else's enlightenment, when you finally accept the terrible and wonderful responsibility of your own inner authority, you don't become disconnected from the world. You become available for genuine connection. You stop projecting your need for completion onto others and start recognizing the complete beings who were hidden beneath your projections all along. The loneliness you feared becomes spaciousness. The silence you avoided becomes the deepest teaching. The path you thought you were lost on reveals itself to have been leading you home to yourself from the very beginning. This is why you keep meeting false mentors. Not because you're unlucky or unworthy, but because your soul is too wise to let you give away your power to anyone who hasn't earned the right to hold it temporarily while you remember how to hold it yourself. Campbell understood something that most spiritual seekers spend years learning the hard way. The call to adventure isn't a call to follow someone else's adventure. It's the summons to finally begin your own. And this call, when it comes authentically, doesn't arrive as an invitation to join something. It arrives as a growing inability to remain where you are, as a restlessness that no external circumstance can satisfy, as a loneliness that no company can cure because it's not actually loneliness at all. It's your soul calling you home to yourself. This is the threshold moment Campbell wrote about so eloquently, the place where the familiar world no longer holds you and the unknown world hasn't yet revealed its gifts. You find yourself in the space between, no longer satisfied with the conversations that once sustained you, no longer convinced by the beliefs that once comforted you, no longer able to pretend that the roles you've been playing represent who you actually are. The old mentors seem suddenly shallow, their answers ringing hollow against the deeper questions that are now arising from within you. Most people experience this threshold as a crisis. They interpret the growing distance between themselves and others as evidence that something is wrong, that they're becoming antisocial, ungrateful, or spiritually bypassed. They rush back toward connection, toward community, toward the safety of shared belief systems and group identity. They don't yet understand that this apparent alienation is actually the beginning of genuine individuation, the prerequisite for authentic relationship rather than its enemy. What Campbell discovered in his study of myths across cultures is that this phase of separation, this time in the wilderness, this period of not belonging anywhere, is not an unfortunate detour from the spiritual path. It is the path. Every hero must spend time in exile before they can return as themselves rather than as a reflection of everyone else's expectations. Every mystic must pass through the dark night of the soul where all borrowed light is extinguished so that their own inner fire can finally be kindled. The mentors you meet during this phase aren't meant to guide you. They're meant to point you toward your own inner guidance. The teachers who appear aren't offering you their truth. They're creating space for your truth to emerge. The real mentor, Campbell knew, doesn't give you answers. They ask you questions that only you can answer. They don't show you the way. They help you recognize that you are the way. And if you're feeling called to this deeper journey, if these words are stirring something that's been waiting patiently beneath the surface of your spiritual seeking, then you're not alone in this recognition. There's a growing circle of souls who are remembering that the path inward is not a path away from life, but toward the source of all life. Join this exploration by sharing your own recognition in the comments below. Tell us about a moment when you realized you were following someone else's journey instead of your own. And if this resonates with the truth you're uncovering in your own depths, subscribe to Walk This Path Together, knowing that walking together means honoring the solitary journey that only each of us can make. The trials that await you once you've accepted the call to your own journey are unlike any obstacles you've previously encountered, because they're not external challenges to be overcome, but internal contradictions to be integrated. Campbell called this the road of trials, but he understood that for the inner hero, every trial is ultimately a meeting with an aspect of yourself that you've been taught to reject, deny, or transcend, rather than embrace and understand. You'll discover that the very qualities that make you feel most alone in conventional spiritual communities, your irreverence toward sacred cows, your inability to accept easy answers, your compulsion to question what others take on faith, are precisely the qualities that qualify you for the deeper initiations. The skepticism that spiritual teachers sometimes shame as spiritual ego is often your soul's discernment protecting you from premature surrender to insufficient truths. The loneliness becomes more refined during this phase, transforming from the crude loneliness of feeling misunderstood to the exquisite solitude of understanding yourself so clearly that you can no longer pretend to be who you're not, even when pretending would purchase belonging. You find yourself in conversations where you can feel the exact moment when you would normally perform agreement, enthusiasm, or spiritual correctness, and instead you simply remain present to what's actually true for you in that moment. The cost is often immediate social discomfort. The reward is the gradual recognition of your own authentic voice. This is where you encounter what Campbell identified as the real mentor, not the teacher who tells you what to think, but the circumstances that force you to discover what you actually believe when no one is watching. Every moment of isolation becomes a question. Who are you when you're not being who others need you to be? Every experience of not fitting in becomes an invitation. What wants to emerge through you that's never emerged through anyone else in quite this way? The beauty of authentic connection, when it finally appears, is shocking in its simplicity. You meet someone who doesn't need you to be other than you are, and you realize that all your previous attempts at relationship were elaborate strategies for avoiding intimacy rather than creating it. The person who can sit with your truth without trying to fix it, improve it, or spiritualize it becomes a mirror in which you can finally see yourself clearly. These connections are rare not because authentic people are scarce, but because you weren't available for authenticity until you stopped abandoning yourself in the name of belonging. The trials continue, but their nature changes. Instead of asking, "How can I become worthy of love?" you start asking, "How can I love what's actually here?" Instead of, "What should I believe?" you ask, "What do I know to be true?" Instead of, "Who should I become?" you ask, "Who have I always been beneath all the wider becoming?" And if you're recognizing yourself in this description, if you're feeling the relief of finally having your experience named and honored rather than pathologized or spiritualized away, then you know you've found your tribe, not of people who believe the same things, but of souls committed to the same courage, the courage to be who they actually are in a world that profits from their self-abandonment. The return that Campbell wrote about is not a geographical homecoming, but a dimensional shift in how you inhabit the same life you've always been living. You don't withdraw from the world. You show up in the world as yourself, rather than as a performance of what the world wants you to be. The solitude that once felt like exile reveals itself to have been preparation for a form of engagement that's more intimate than anything you experienced when you were trying to belong everywhere, and therefore belonged nowhere. You find yourself in the paradoxical position of being simultaneously more alone and more connected than you've ever been. Alone because you've stopped outsourcing your sense of reality to group consensus and social validation. Connected because when you stop performing yourself, you become available for others to stop performing themselves in your presence. The relationships that remain are built on truth rather than need, on recognition rather than projection. The spiritual marketplace that once seemed so important now appears as what it always was, a transitional space for souls who haven't yet remembered their own authority. You feel compassion for seekers who are still trying to find themselves in teachings and teachers, because you remember the necessity of that phase, but you no longer mistake the menu for the meal. The techniques, practices, and wisdom traditions that serve you now are ones that point you back to your own inner knowing, rather than replacing it with borrowed knowledge. This is the freedom Campbell spoke of, not freedom from responsibility, but freedom to respond from your own depths rather than from conditioned patterns of people-pleasing, spiritual correctness, or unconscious rebellion. You discover that the individuation you were afraid would make you selfish actually makes you more truly generous, because you're finally giving from fullness rather than from the hope of receiving validation in return. The loneliness transforms one final time, revealing itself to have been preparing you for the ultimate intimacy, the intimacy with life itself that becomes possible when you stop demanding that life conform to your preferences and start receiving life as the teaching it has always been. Every experience becomes a teacher, but you are finally the student rather than trying to be the teacher of your experience. You understand now why you had to meet all those false mentors, why you had to exhaust yourself trying to live other people's spiritual lives, why you had to feel so alone before you could discover that aloneness is not the opposite of love, but its deepest expression. The journey inward was never a journey away from the world. It was a journey toward the place in yourself from which you could finally meet the world without armor, agenda, or the desperate need to be someone other than who you've always been. The hero's journey doesn't end with enlightenment. It ends with the recognition that there was never anywhere to go and nothing to become, and that this recognition is not a consolation prize, but the treasure that was always waiting to be claimed by the one who could finally stop seeking long enough to find what was never lost.